Good afternoon from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 3:21 p.m. on the 14th of November 2024, and I thought I'd carry on reading from Bernard Malamud, the Magic Barrel and Other Stories, and I thought I would read the longest one that I didn't think I'd have time for yesterday, The Lady of the Lake. I haven't perused it. I mean, I read these books when I was a teenager. It's how long I've preserved them for. Yes, holding on while not letting go, babies. But books are valuable assets to have, and I cherish them. I've always cherished books. I used to have a lot more books till I decluttered, and now I regret decluttering. But I live in a very small cottage, and 3-bedroom cottage, and post-war cottage, and I kind of got sick of being crowded by too much stuff, so I did declutter, and had a lot of my occult and magical books fucking stolen from me, which I'm livid about. Hadn't even realised that was happening. They were totally taken advantage of back in the day when I was macked out on heavy psych meds and wasn't conscious that my friends were not really my friends, am I right? By the gods. So as a consequence, I don't lend out books anymore, and people who come to my home who steal from me are given very short shrift. It's not something I would ever tolerate or turn a blind eye to again. People who steal from you, demand food from you when you're so poor you can barely feed yourself, and otherwise vulturise you and not actually your friends. Babies. But there is that. But anyway, that was a long time ago now, and I'm kind of over it. I'm just setting down parameters for future reference on people who I deem to be friends and people who I deem to not be friends. And friends don't rob friends, just saying. Don't rob strangers either, but particularly you don't rob your own bloody friends or family. Had a lifetime of that, being robbed by my own mother, so it's kind of a sore point if I catch anyone doing it to me again. But on a happy note, it's been a lovely day today, and I had Charlie out in the garden. I posted a video earlier of her little escapades. And by the gods, it's hot in here. I might have to put on the air conditioning. What else did I do? Oh, I went under the house and I scrubbed the old fridge I've got under the house that still works, but I'd left it empty for the last 2 years because I didn't have money to put extra food in it. What's the point in running electricity on an empty fridge? But I've decided to bit by bit stock that fridge freezer compartment up with food, so I put a few bits and pieces in there today. Big bag of flour I bought a few weeks ago that I'm worried might get weevils, so whack that in the freezer, and I'll just store it in the fridge compartment later. I'll, pardon me, move it out of the freezer, move it into the fridge side, but trying to make sure I have enough food. I'm worrying about food all of a sudden, which is odd because normally I don't worry. I just live by the seat of my pants, pension day to pension day, and even in the fucking worst of the COVID nightmare, when everyone went berserk hoarding food, I refused to participate in that because, well, number one, I wouldn't have been able to afford to, and number two, I find it greedy. However, I was grateful for my friend that did hoard some toilet paper, so she was able to help me out occasionally. But she said she'd been hoarding that for many, many years, long before COVID came along, so there was that. She's a very future-thinking person, very wise, but to future think and to stockpile good foodstuffs and household supplies that far ahead, you have to have enough money coming in, which I certainly do not and have not had. And so, yeah, I'm wondering about what the obsession this last couple of days of worrying about food is. Maybe some shit's about to hit the fan and I'm intuiting it, but that's negative thinking. Sometimes it's just a fiction of not a fiction, a figment of my anxiety, which can spiral up and spiral down according to how fucking hot it is in Brisbane, Australia, or what other things are going on around me that don't sit comfortably with me that I'm aware of, you know. Anyway, I think there'll be another storm this afternoon or this evening. It's not looking too dark, but the cloud formation is kind of weird looking. We'll go with weird looking. So, what was the other thing I did today? Yesterday I cleaned my fish pond. Oh, good news, Snakey didn't eat all my fish. I saw at least one fish in there, so there's maybe she only ate one. So I'm pleased, because I thought she ate all my goldfish and was pretty upset about that actually. So yes, the fish pond is still happening in a far out way, and I'm happy about that because it gives me great joy and delight. And tinkling water is soothing in the garden, have it for my nerves. What else did I do today? Not very much really, just cleaned the fridge out. It was filthy, needed a good wash because I've had it wide open, the door and everything, so all the dust and grime blew into it from under the house. The paintwork's all eroded on top of it from where the possums run across the top and pee on it, so that's annoying. But it was an old second-hand fridge I got for free, and as long as it works, it doesn't matter what the paintwork on the outside looks like, am I right? So I'm making do, making the best of everything I have. And it's the other thing I did today. I ordered Hanukkah candles. Hanukkah doesn't fall until the first night, which falls on the evening of Christmas Day this year. It's unusual for Hanukkah to exactly line up with Christmas. They're a totally different holiday and they're not at all related to each other, but it's a bit unusual, but we're on the lunar calendar, so that's the card that the Holy One dealt us. First night of Hanukkah is Christmas Day, Christmas night. Anyway, the last few years I've not been able to find Hanukkah candles anywhere and got myself into a little bit of histrionic tizzies over it. And a very wonderful friend who's very generous to me bought me the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years worth of Hanukkah candles. So I decided that I would be self-determined and an independent woman this year, and get my head out of my own ass and spend my own money on my own holy days, which is funny because I'm barely a Jew anymore, and Hanukkah's a minor festival, but I did decide today randomly that I would buy the Hanukkah candles from Golds in Sydney, which I did. And they weren't too expensive, they were only about $26, but the bloody postage was $20, so nearly $50 to get my candles. But look, I bought them, they're being sent up, and I'll have them ready when Hanukkah comes, and I won't feel like such a parasitical, schmendrick or a schnorrer on my beautiful, soulful friends who literally lift me up like a ghost on a coat hanger and shake me out and make sure I have my few religious requirements that I like to adhere to. So, to my beautiful one, for your generosity to me over many, many years, and I hope you're proud of me that I'm kicking off the training wheels and buying my own stuff now. I hope you're proud of me. I'm trying to be financially solvent and independent, but my advance came and my advance will run through very quickly by the time I buy my silversmithing equipment and tools that I need. And I bought a few things, aromatherapy type things, because I'm treating my own toe fungus, which is gross, and I've suffered with it for about 6 years, and the doctors won't give me medication for it because it blows out your liver, and my liver's already kind of damaged, so I'm having to make my own brews to put on my feckin' toes, which heal up and then flare up and then heal up and then flare up, and it's been going like that for at least 6 years, maybe longer. So the other thing I bought today was an assortment of oils that I need to blend to address that health issue that's been ongoing. The other little jobby I've got to do is to go and see my GP, who also, looks at your skin cancers. I have to go and see him because I did get a reminder about 3 or 4 weeks ago from my normal skin doctor, but they no longer bulk bill, and he's not sexually like sleazy or creepy with me like I had with the other skin doctors in the past that were fucking inappropriate and I fought them like a demon. But he's just kind of got a weird bedside manner that makes me feel uncomfortable. So I think I'll try getting my fairly newish GP to do the skin check, because he's at least very calm and patient and doesn't trigger me. But then it's a bit different when they've got to leer at you with a lupe very close to your skin and a little bit too intimate, so I don't know. But anyway, I've got to get that job done because I'm at high risk with skin cancers of that blowing to something really life-threatening. So it's another little job here I have to do. But apart from that, I've sorted out my issues with ordering the oils I need. I think I should have bought flaxseed oil. That was $25 for 200 mils. So by the gods, it's all expensive. But I'll just make do with what I've ordered so far and carry on being awesome. And hopefully one day the toe fungus thing will clear up and leave me permanently, which is a bit highly unlikely since I constantly walk around, the garden, my home barefoot and whatever. But anyway, it's not very sexy what I'm talking about now, is it? Oh, all my foot fetishists that all got very titillated about the nice $4,000 and $8,000 boots I wanted to buy just all suffered from flaccid penile and went limp. Ah, toe fungus. I don't do these things to titillate you boys, but it is what it is. Life happens when you're busy making other plans. Who said that? Was it John Lennon or one of the Beatles anyway? Life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. Anyway, Mama T's plan of action right now. Oh dear goddess, we're losing everything. We're losing Bernard Malamud all over the house. My plan of action right now is I'm going to read to you The Lady of the Lake. So here we go. Bing, bang, boom, babies. Henry Levin, and ambitious, handsome 30, who walked the floors in Macy's book department wearing a white flower in his lapel, having recently come into a small inheritance, quit and went abroad seeking romance. Well, he's only 30, still a kid. Let him have his joy, am I right? By the gods. If I went abroad seeking romance, dear goddess, perish the thought. Anyway, in Paris, for no reason he was sure of, except that he was tired of the past, tired of the limitations it had imposed upon him. Although he had signed the hotel register with his right name, Levin took to calling himself Henry R. Freeman. Freeman lived for a short while in a little hotel in a narrow gas lamplit street near the Luxembourg Gardens. In the beginning, he liked the sense of foreignness of the city, of things different, anything likely to happen. He liked, he said to himself, the possible combinations. But not much did happen. He met no one he particularly cared for. He had sometimes in the past deceived himself about women. They had come to less than he had expected. And since the heat was hot and tourists underfoot, he felt he must flee. He boarded the Milan Express and after Dijon developed a painful, palpitating anxiety. This grew so troublesome that he had serious visions of leaping off the train, but reason prevailed and he rode on. However, he did not get to Milan. Nearing Stresa, after a quick astonished look at Lake Maggiore, Freeman, a nature lover from early childhood, pulled his suitcase off the rack and hurriedly left the train. He at once felt better. An hour later, he was established in a pensione in a villa not far from the line of assorted hotels fronting the Stresa shore. The padrona, a talkative woman, much interested in her guests, complained that June and July had been lost in unseasonable cold and wet. Many had cancelled. There were few Americans around. This didn't exactly disturb Freeman, who had had his full share of Coney Island. He lived in an airy, French-windowed room, including soft bed and spacious bath, and though personally the shower type, was glad of the change. He was very fond of the balcony at his window, where he loved to read or study Italian, glancing up often to gaze at the water. The long blue lake, sometimes green, sometimes gold, went out of sight among distant mountains. He liked the red-roofed town of Palanza on the opposite shore, and especially the 4 beautiful islands in the water, tiny but teeming with palazzi, tall trees, gardens, visible statuary. The sight of these islands aroused in Freeman a deep emotion, each a universe. How often do we come across one in a lifetime? Filled him with expectancy of what he wasn't sure. Freeman still hoped for what he hadn't, what few got in the world, and many dared not think of, to wit, love, adventure, freedom. Alas, the words by now sounded slightly comical, yet there were times when he was staring at the islands. If you pushed him a little, he could almost cry. Ah, what names of beauty! Isola Bella, De Pescatore, Madre, and Del Dongo. Travel is truly broadening, he thought. Whoever got emotional over Welfare Island? But the islands, the 2 he visited, let him down. Freeman walked off the Vaporetto at Isola Bella amid a crowd of late-season tourists in all languages, especially German, who were at once beset by many vendors of cheap trinkets. And he discovered there were guided tours only, strictly no unsupervised wandering. The pink palazzo full of old junk, surrounded by artificial formal gardens, including grottos made of seashells, the stone statuary, a tasteless laugh. And although Isola de Pescatori had some honest atmosphere. Old houses hugging crooked streets, thick nets drying in piles near fishermen's dories drawn up among trees. Again there were tourists snapping in all pictures, and the whole town catering to them. Everybody had something to sell. You could buy better in Macy's basement. Freeman returned to his pensione disappointed. The islands, beautiful from afar, up close were so much stage scenery. He complained thus to the padrona, and she urged him to visit Isola del Dongo. More natural, she persuaded him. You never saw such unusual gardens, and the palazzo is historical, full of the tombs of famous men of the region, including a cardinal who became a saint. Napoleon, the emperor, slept there. The French have always loved this island. Their writers have wept at its beauty. However, Freeman showed little interest. Gardens I've seen in my time. So when restive, he wandered in the back streets of Stresa, watching the men playing at boccia. Is it boccia or boccia? It's that weird ball game. Anyway, boccia, I'll pronounce that. Someone from Italy can correct me later. Avoiding the laden store windows. Drifting by devious routes back to the lake, he sat at a bench in the small park, watching the lingering sunset over the dark mountains and thinking of a life of adventure. He watched alone, talked now and then to stray Italians. Almost everybody spoke a good broken English and lived too much on himself. On weekends there was, however, a buzz of merriment in the streets. Excursionists from around Milan arrived in busloads. All day they hurried to their picnics. At night, one of them pulled an accordion out of a bus and played sad Venetian or happy Neapolitan songs. Then the young Italians and their girls got up and danced in tight embrace in the public square. But not Freeman. One evening at sunset, the calm waters so marvellously painted they drew him from inactivity, he hired a rowboat and, for want of any place more exciting to go, rowed towards the Isola del Dongo. He had no intention other than reaching it, then turning back, a round trip completed. 2/3 of the way there, he began to row with growing uneasiness, which soon became dread, because a stiff breeze had risen, driving the sucking waves against the side of the boat. It was a warm wind, but a wind was a wind, and the water was wet. Freeman didn't row well, had learned late in his 20s, despite the nearness of Central Park, and he swam poorly, always swallowing water, never enough breath to get anywhere, clearly a landlubber from the word go. He strongly considered returning to Stresa. It was at least a half-mile to the island, then a mile and a half in return, but chided himself for his timidity. He had, after all, hired the boat for an hour, so he kept rowing, though he feared the risk. However, the waves were not too bad, and he had discovered the trick of letting them hit the prow head on. Although he handled his oars awkwardly, Freeman, to his surprise, made good time. The wind now helped rather than hindered, and daylight, reassuring, still lingered in the sky among streaks of red. At last Freeman neared the island. Like Isola Bella, it rose in terraces through hedged gardens crowded with statuary, to a palazzo on top. But the padrona had told the truth. This island looked more interesting than the others, the vegetation lush, wilder, exotic birds flying around. By now the place was bathed in mist, and despite the thickening dark, Freeman recaptured the sense of awe and beauty he had felt upon first beholding the islands. At the same time, he recalled a sad memory of unlived life, his own, of all that had slipped through his fingers. Amidst these thoughts, he was startled by a movement in the garden by the water's edge. It had momentarily seemed as though a statue had come to life, but Freeman quickly realized a woman was standing this side of a low marble wall, watching the water. He could not, of course, make out her face, though he sensed she was young. Only the skirt of her white dress moved in the breeze. He imagined someone waiting for her lover and was tempted to speak to her, but then the wind blew up strongly and the waves rocked his rowboat. Freeman hastily turned to the boat with one oar and, pulling hard, took off. The wind drenched him with spray. The rowboat bobbed along nasty waves. The going grew frighteningly rough. He had visions of drowning, the rowboat swamped, poor Freeman slowly sinking to the bottom, striving fruitlessly to reach the top. But as he rowed, his heart like a metal disc in his mouth, and still rowed on, gradually he overcame his fears, also the waves and wind. Although the lake was by now black, though the sky still dimly reflected white, turning from time to time to peer ahead, he guided himself by the flickering lights of the Stresa shore. It rained hard as he landed, but Freeman, as he beached the boat, considered his adventure an accomplishment and ate a hearty supper at an expensive restaurant. Yes, it's definitely another afternoon, evening storm coming. The curtains billowing in his sunny room the next morning awoke him. Freeman rose, shaved, bathed, and, after breakfast, got a haircut. Wearing his bathing trunks under slacks, he sneaked on to the Hotel Excelsior beach for a dip, short but refreshing. In the early afternoon, he read his Italian lesson on the balcony, then snatched a snooze. At 4:30, he felt he really hadn't made up his mind until then. Freeman boarded the Vaporetto, making its hourly tour of the islands. After touching at Isola Madre, the boat headed for the Isola del Dongo. As they were approaching the island, is it Dongo or Donjo? Don't know. As they were approaching the island, coming from the direction opposite that which Freeman had taken last night, he observed a lanky boy in bathing trunks sunning himself on a raft in the lake. Nobody he recognised. When the Vaporetto landed at the dock on the southern side of the island, to Freeman's surprise and deep regret, the area was crowded with the usual stalls piled high with tourist gewgaws. Gewgaws? Never heard of that name. I shall have to Google that. Mama T shall have to Google it. a showy thing, especially one that is useless and worthless, a house full of Victorian gewgaws. Gewgaws, showy, useless thing. Sort of how my mother's home was, very showy, very useless. Well, I've decluttered since then. Still a bit showy and useless though, people of Earth. But anyway, where were we? I've lost where we were at. Here we are. And though he had hoped otherwise, inspection of the island was strictly in the guide's footsteps, and vietato trying to go anywhere alone. You paid 100 lira for a ticket, then trailed behind this unshaven, sad-looking clown, who stabbed a jaunty cane at the sky as he announced in 3 languages to the tourists who followed him, "Please not stray nor wander. The family del Donjo, one of the most illustrious of Italy, so requests. Only thus is it able to remain open, these magnificent historical palaces and supreme gardens, for the inspection by the members of all nations." They tailed the guide at a fast clip through the palace, through long halls hung with tapestries and elaborate mirrors, enormous rooms filled with antique furniture, old books, paintings, statuary, a lot of it in better taste than the stuff he had seen on the other island, and he visited where Napoleon had slept, a bed. Yet Freeman secretly touched the counterpane, though not quickly enough to escape the all-seeing eye of the Italian guide, who wrathfully raised his cane to the level of Freeman's heart and explosively shouted, "Basta!" which actually means enough, not bastard like you would think, because it sounds like bastard, but it doesn't actually mean that at all. Basta! Enough already. The embarrassed Freeman and 2 British ladies carrying parasols. This embarrassed Freeman and 2 British ladies carrying parasols. He felt bad until the group, about 20, were led into the garden. Gazing from here, the highest point of the island, at the panorama of the golden blue lake, Freeman gasped. And the luxuriant, I've got all these things running over my head about food and what I want to have for dinner. It's quite astonishing. I'm under the effects of the incoming storm. It's going to be a doozy, people of Earth, sending me troppo. But anyway, and the luxuriant vegetation of the island was daring, voluptuous. They went among orange and lemon trees. He had never known that lemon was a perfume. Very pretty it is too. Magnolia, oleander. The guide called out the names. Everywhere were flowers in great profusion, huge camellias, rhododendron, jasmine, roses in innumerable colours and varieties, all bathed in intoxicating floral fragrance. Freeman's head swam. He felt dizzy, slightly off his rocker at this extraordinary assailment of his senses. At the same time, though, it was an underground reaction. He experienced a painful, contracting remembrance, more like a warning of personal poverty. This he had difficulty accounting for because he usually held a decent opinion of himself. When the comical guide bounced forward with his cane indicating cedars, eucalyptus, camphor and pepper trees, the former floor walker, overcome by all he was for the first time seeing, at the same moment choked by almost breathless excitement, fell behind the group of tourists and pretended to inspect the berries of a pepper tree. As the guide hurried forward, Freeman, though not positive he had planned it so, ducked behind the pepper tree, ran along a path beside a tall laurel shrub and down 2 flights of stairs. He hopped over a marble wall and went hastily through a small wood, expectant, seeking, he thought only God knew what. He figured he was heading in the direction of the garden by the water, where he had seen the girl in the white dress last night. But after several minutes of involved wandering, Freeman came upon a little beach, a pebbly strand, leading down stone steps into the lake. About 100 feet away, a raft was anchored, nobody on it. Exhausted by the excitement, a little moody, Freeman sat down under a tree to rest. When he glanced up, a girl in a white bathing suit was coming up the steps out of the water. Freeman stared as she sloshed up the shore, her wet skin glistening in bright sunlight. She had seen him and quickly bent for a towel she had left on a blanket, draped it over her shoulders, and modestly held the ends together over her high arched breast. Her wet black hair fell upon her shoulders. She stared at Freeman. He rose, forming words of apology in his mind. A haze that had been before his eyes evaporated. Freeman grew pale, and the girl blushed. Freeman was, of course, a New York City boy from a way back. As the girl stood there, unselfconsciously regarding him, it could not have been longer than 30 seconds. He was aware of his background and certain other disadvantages, but he also knew he wasn't a bad-looking guy, even, it could be said, quite on the handsome side. Though a pinprick bald at the back of his noggin, not more than a dime could adequately cover, his head of hair was alive, expressive. Freeman's grey eyes were clear, unenvious, nose well moulded, the mouth generous. He had well-proportioned arms and legs, and his stomach lay respectfully flat. He was a bit short, but on him, he knew, it barely showed. One of his former girlfriends had told him she sometimes thought of him as tall. This counterbalanced the occasions when he had thought of himself as short. Yet, though he knew he made a good appearance, Freeman feared this moment, partly because of all he hungered for from life, and partly because of the uncountable obstacles existing between strangers, may the word forever perish. She apparently had no fear of their meeting, as a matter of surprising fact, seemed to welcome it, immediately curious about him. She had, of course, the advantage of position, which included receiving, so to speak, the guest intruder. And she had Grace to lean on, herself also favoured physically. Mama, what a queenly, high-assed form, itself the cause of grace. Her dark, sharp Italian face had that quality of beauty which holds the mark of history, the beauty of people and civilization. The large brown eyes under straight, slender brows were filled with sweet light. Her lips were purely cut as if from red flowers. Her nose was perhaps the one touch of imperfection that perfected the rest, a trifle long and thin. Despite the effect, a little of sculpture, her ovoid face, tapering to a small chin, was soft, suffused with the loveliness of youth. She was about 23 or 4, and when Freeman had to a small degree calmed down, he discovered in her eyes a hidden hunger or memory thereof. Perhaps it was sadness, and he felt he was for this reason, if not unknown others, sincerely welcomed. Had he, O God, at last met his fate? Si è perduto, the girl asked, smiling, still tightly holding her white towel. Freeman understood and answered in English. No, I came on my own, on purpose you might say. He had in mind to ask her if she remembered having seen him before, namely in last night's rowboat, but didn't. Are you American? She inquired, her Italian accent pleasantly touched with an English one. That's right. The girl studied him for a full minute and then hesitantly asked, Are you perhaps Jewish? Freeman suppressed a groan. Though secretly shocked by the question, it was not, in a way, unexpected. Yet he did not look Jewish, could pass as not, had. So without batting an eyelash, he said, No, he wasn't. And a moment later added, though he personally had nothing against them. It was just a thought. You Americans are so varied, she explained vaguely. I understand, he said, but have no worry. Lifting his hat, he introduced himself. Henry R. Freeman, travelling abroad. My name, she said, after an absent-minded pause, is Isabella del Dongo. Safe on first, thought Freeman. I'm proud to know you, he bowed. She gave him, a man who's proud to know you. Proud to know you. What a delightful turn of phrase. She gave him her hand with a gentle smile. He was about to surprise it with a kiss when the comical guide appeared at a wall a few terraces above. He gazed at them in astonishment, then let out a yell and ran down the stairs, waving his cane like a rapier. Transgressor! He shouted at Freeman. The girl said something to calm him, but the guide was too furious to listen. He grabbed Freeman's arm, yanking him toward the stairs, and though Freeman, in the interest of good manners, barely resisted, the guide whacked him across the seat of the pants, but the ex-floor walker did not complain. Though his departure from the island had been, to put it mildly, an embarrassment, the girl had vanished after her unsuccessful momentary intercession. Freeman dreamed of a triumphant return. The big thing so far was that she, a knockout, had taken to him. He had been favoured by her. Just why, he couldn't exactly tell, but he could tell, yes, had seen in her eyes. Yet, wondering if yes, why yes, an old habit, Freeman, among other things he had already thought of, namely the thus and therefore of man-woman attraction, laid it to the fact that he was different, had dared. He had, specifically, dared to duck the guide and be waiting for her at the edge of the lake when she came out of it. And she was different too, which of course quickened her response to him, not only in her looks and background, but of course different as regards past. He had been reading with fascination about the Del Dongos in all the local guidebooks. Her past he could see boiling in her all the way back to the knights of old and then some. His own history was something else again, but men were malleable, and he wasn't afraid of attempting to create certain daring combinations. Isabella and Henry Freeman, hoping to meet someone like her, was his main reason for having come abroad. And he had also felt he would be appreciated more by a European woman, his personality, that is. Yet, since their lives were so different, Freeman had moments of grave doubt, wondered what trials he was in for if he went after her, as he had every intention of doing, with her unknown family, other things of that sort. And he was, an afterthought, worried because she had asked him if he was Jewish. Why had the question popped out of her pretty mouth before they had even met? He had never before been asked anything like this by a girl, under, let's call it, similar circumstances. Just when they were looking each other over, he was puzzled because he absolutely did not look Jewish, but then he figured her question might have been a test of some kind, she making it a point when a man attracted her quickly to determine his eligibility. Maybe she had once had some sort of unhappy experience with a Jew. Unlikely, but possible. They were now everywhere. Freeman finally explained it to himself as one of those things, perhaps a queer thought that had for no good reason impulsively entered her mind. And because it was queer, his answer, without elaboration, was sufficient. With ancient history, why bother? All these things, the odds against him, whetted his adventurous appetite. Mama tea. I wanted to go down to Woolies and get a hot cooked chicken and some salad and have a nice dinner tonight. And the storm's coming. I'm not going to make it, am I? I'm not going to make it there and back in time. Well, I won't starve. It's all good. I've got spring rolls under the house and a newly cleaned up fridge. Spring rolls for dinner is not so bad. The wind's come up now. Oh! Okay. Let's just check things out here. Where was I? He was in a grip of an almost unbearable excitement and must see her again soon, often, become her friend. Not more than a beginning, but where begin? He considered calling her on the telephone, if there was but one in a palazzo where Napoleon had slept. But if the maid or somebody answered the phone first, he would have a ridiculous time identifying himself, so he settled for sending her a note. Freeman wrote a few lines on good stationery he had bought for the purpose, asking if he might have the pleasure of seeing her again under circumstances favourable to leisurely conversation. He suggested a carriage ride to one of the other lakes in the neighbourhood and signed his name, not Levin, of course, but Freeman. Later he told the padrona that anything addressed to that name was meant for him. She was always to refer to him as Mr. Freeman. He gave no explanation, although the padrona raised interested brows, but after he had slipped her, for reasons of friendship, 1,000 lira, her expression became serene. Siri thought when I said serene that I said Siri. That's hilarious. Stop listening into me, Siri. Stalking me, Surrey. It's getting weird, Surrey. Anyway, that was very random because it just came on randomly. The Ghost in the Machine, do you understand? The book is in the iPhone and the laptop and on the roof. Having mailed the letter, he felt time descend on him like an intricate trap. How would he ever endure until she answered? That evening he impatiently hired a rowboat and headed for Isola del Dongo. The water was glassy smooth, but when he arrived the palazzo was dark, almost gloomy. Not a single window lit. The whole island looked dead. He saw no one, though he imagined her presence. Freeman thought of tying up at a dock and searching around a bit, but it seemed like folly. Rowing back to Stresa, he was stopped by the lake patrol and compelled to show his passport. An officer advised him not to row on the lake after dark. He might have an accident. The next morning, wearing sunglasses, a light straw recently purchased, and a seersucker suit, he boarded the Vaporetto and soon landed on the island of his dreams, together with the usual group of tourists. But the fanatic guide at once spied Freeman and, waving his cane like a schoolmaster's rod, called on him to depart peacefully. Fearing a scene that the girl would surely hear of, Freeman left at once, greatly annoyed. The padrona that night, in a confidential mood, warned him not to have anything to do with anybody on the Isola del Dongo. The family had a perfidious history and was known for its deceit and trickery. On Sunday, at the low point of depression after an afternoon nap, Freeman heard a knock on his door. A long-legged boy in short pants and a torn shirt handed him an envelope. Excuse me. The corner embossed with somebody's coat of arms. Breathlessly, Freeman tore it open and extracted a sheet of thin, bluish paper with a few lines of spidery writing on it. You may come this afternoon at 6. Ernesto will accompany you. I. Del D. It was already after 5. Freeman was overwhelmed, giddy with pleasure. Do you say Ernesto? He asked the boy. The boy, perhaps 11 or 12, who had been watching Freeman with large, curious eyes, shook his head. No, signore, sono Giuseppe. Dove Ernesto? The boy pointed vaguely at the window, which Freeman took to mean that whoever he was waiting at the lakefront. Freeman changed in the bathroom, emerging in a jiffy with his new straw hat on and the seersucker suit. Let's go. He ran down the stairs, the boy running after him. Oh, isn't it wonderful when a man's passionate about you and he runs after you and waits for you and with great delight and intensity. And then nothing came of it. Oh, smallest fire. At the dock, to Freeman's startled surprise, Ernesto turned out to be the temperamental guide with the pestiferous cane, probably a major domo in the palazzo, long with the family. Now a guide in another context, he was obviously an unwilling one to judge from his expression. Perhaps a few wise words had subdued him, and though haughty still, he settled for a show of politeness. Freeman greeted him courteously. The guide sat not in the ritzy launch Freeman had expected to see, but at the stern of an oversized, weather-beaten rowboat a cross between a fishing dory and a small lifeboat. Preceded by the boy, Freeman climbed in over the unoccupied part of the rear seat. Then, as Giuseppe took his place at the oars, hesitantly sat down next to Ernesto. One of the boatmen on the shore gave them a shove off, and the boy began to row. The big boat seemed hard to manoeuvre, but Giuseppe, working deftly with a pair of long, heavy oars, managed with ease. He rowed quickly from the shore and towards the island where Isabella was waiting. Isabella. Freeman, though heartened to be off, contented, loving the wide, airy world, wasn't comfortable sitting so snug with Ernesto, who smelled freshly of garlic. The talkative guide was a silent traveller. A dead cheroot hung from the corner of his mouth, and from time to time he absently poked his cane in the slats at the bottom of the boat. If there was no leak, Freeman thought, he would create one. He seemed tired, as if he had been carousing all night and had found no time to rest. Once he removed his black felt hat to mop his head with a handkerchief, and Freeman realised he was bald and looked surprisingly old. Though tempted to say something pleasant to the old man, no hard feelings on this marvellous journey, Freeman had no idea where to begin. What would he reply to a grunt? After a time of prolonged silence, now a bit on edge, Freeman remarked, "Maybe I'd better row and give the boy a rest." "As you wish," Ernesto shrugged. Freeman traded places with the boy, then wished he hadn't. The oars were impossibly heavy. He rowed badly, allowing the left oar to sink deeper into the water than the right, thus twisting the boat off course. It was like pulling a hearse, and as he awkwardly splashed the oars around, he was embarrassedly aware of the boy and Ernesto, alike in their dark eyes and greedy beaks, a pair of odd birds openly staring at him. He wished them far, far away from the beautiful island, and in exasperation pulled harder. By dint of determined effort, though his palms were painfully blistered, he began to row rhythmically, and the boat went along more smoothly. Freeman gazed up in triumph, but they were no longer watching him, the boy trailing a straw in the water, the guide staring dreamily into the distance. After a while, as if having studied Freeman and decided, when all was said and done, that he wasn't exactly a villain, Ernesto spoke in a not unfriendly tone. "Everybody says how rich is America," he remarked. "Rich enough," Freeman grunted. "Also, this is the same with you," the guide spoke with a half-embarrassed smile around his drooping cheroot butt. "I'm comfortable," Freeman replied, and in honesty added, "but I have to work for a living." "For the young people is a nice life, no? I mean, there is always what to eat, and for the woman in the house, many remarkable machines." "Many," Freeman said. Nothing comes from nothing, he thought. He's been asked to ask questions. Freeman then gave the guide an earful on the American standard of living, and he meant living. This, for whatever it was worth to such as the Italian aristocracy. He hoped for the best, You could never tell the needs and desires of others. Ernesto, as if memorizing what he had just heard, watched Freeman row for a while. "Are you in business?" he ultimately asked. Freeman searched around and came up with, "Sort of in public relations." Ernesto now threw away his butt. "Excuse me that I ask, how much does one earn in business in America?" Calculating quickly, Freeman replied, "I personally average about $100 a week. That comes to about $250,000 lira every month." Ernesto repeated the sum, holding onto his hat in the breeze. The boy's eyes had widened. Freeman hid a satisfied smile. "And your father?" Here the guide paused, searching Freeman's face. "What about him?" asked Freeman, tensing. "What is his trade?" "Was. He's dead. Insurance." Ernesto removed his respectful hat, letting the sunlight bathe his bald head. They said nothing more until they had reached the island. Then Freeman, consolidating possible gain, asked him in a complimentary tone where he had learned his English. "Everywhere," Ernesto replied with a weary smile, and Freeman, alert for each shift in prevailing wind, felt that if he hadn't made a bosom friend, he had at least softened an enemy, and that, on home grounds, was going good. They landed and watched the boy tie up the boat. Freeman asked Ernesto where the Signorina was. The guide, now looking bored by it all, pointed his cane at the top terraces, a sweeping gesture that seemed to take in the whole upper half of the luscious island. Freeman hoped the man would not insist on accompanying him and interfering with his meeting with the girl, but when he looked down from looking up without sighting Isabella, both Ernesto and Giacobbe had made themselves scarce. Leave it to the Italians at this sort of thing, Freeman thought. Warning himself to be careful, tactful, he went quickly up the stairs. At each terrace he glanced around, then ran up to the next, his hat already in his hand. He found her, after wandering through profusions of flowers, where he had guessed she would be, alone in the garden behind the palazzo. She was sitting on an old stone bench near a little marble fountain, whose jets from the mouths of mocking elves sparkled in mellow sunlight. Beholding her, the lovely face, sharply incised yet soft in its femininity, the dark eyes, pensive, her hair loosely knotted at the nape of her graceful neck, Freeman ate to his all-blistered fingers. She was wearing a linen blouse of some soft shade of red that fell gently upon her breasts, and a long, slender black skirt. Her tanned legs were without stockings, and on her narrow feet she wore sandals. As Freeman approached her, walking slowly to keep from loping, she brushed back a strand of hair, a gesture so beautiful it saddened him, because it was gone in the doing, and though Freeman, on this miraculous Sunday evening, was aware of his indefatigable reality, he could not help thinking, as he dwelt upon her lost gesture, that she might be as elusive as it, as evanescent, and so might this island be, and so, despite all the days he had lived through, good, bad, and boring, That too often sneaked into his thoughts. So indeed might he, today, tomorrow. He went towards her with a deep sense of the transitoriness of things, but this feeling was overwhelmed by one of pure joy when she rose to give him her hand. "Welcome," Isabella said, blushing. She seemed happy, yet in her manner a little agitated to see him. Perhaps one and the same thing. He's itchy. Got itch. Ouch. And he wanted then and there to embrace her, but could not work up the nerve. Although he felt in her presence a fulfilment, as if they had already confessed love for one another, at the same time Freeman sensed an uneasiness in her, which made him think, though he fought the idea, that they were far away from love, or at least were approaching it through opaque mystery. But that's what happened, Freeman, who had often been in love, told himself. Until you were lovers, you were strangers. Sometimes you're fucking strangers even after you're lovers too. Fucking parasites and users and abusers. But never mind. Life goes on, beautiful people. I know that. In conversation, he was at first formal. "I thank you for your kind note. I have been looking forward to seeing you." She turned towards the palazzo. "My people are out. They have gone to a wedding on another island. May I show you something of the palace?" He was at this news both pleased and disappointed. He did not at the moment feel like meeting her family, yet if she had presented him, it would have been a good sign. They walked for a while in the garden. Then Isabella took Freeman's hand and led him through a heavy door into the large rococo palazzo. "What would you care to see?" Though he had superficially been through 2 doors of the building, wanting to be led by her this close to him, Freeman replied, "Whatever you want me to." She took him first to the chamber where Napoleon had slept. It wasn't Napoleon himself who slept here, Isabella explained. He slept on Isola Bella. His brother Joseph may have been here, or perhaps Pauline with one of her lovers. No one is sure. "Oh, a trick," said Freeman. "We often pretend," she remarked. "This is a poor country." They entered the main picture gallery. Isabella pointed out the Titians, Tintorettos, Bellinis, making Freeman breathless. Then, at the door of the room, she turned with an embarrassed smile and said that most of the paintings in the gallery were copies. "Copies?" Freeman was shocked. "Yes, although there are some fair originals from the Lombard school." "All the Titians are copies?" "All." This slightly depressed him. "What about the statuary? Also copies?" "For the most part." His face fell. "Is something the matter?" "Only that I couldn't tell the fake from the real." "Oh, but many of the copies are exceedingly beautiful," Isabella said. "It would take an expert to tell they weren't originals." "I guess I've got a lot to learn," Freeman said. At this she squeezed his hand, and he felt better. "But the tapestries," she remarked as they traversed the long hall hung with them, which darkened as the sun set, "were genuine and valuable." They meant little to Freeman. Long, floor-to-ceiling, bluish-green fabrics of woodland scenes, stags, unicorns, and tigers disporting themselves, though in one picture the tiger killed the unicorn. Isabella hurried past this and led Freeman into a room he had not been in before, hung with tapestries of sombre scenes from the Inferno. One before which they stopped was of a writhing leper, spotted from head to foot with pustulating sores, which he tore at with his nails, but the itch went on forever. What did he do to deserve his fate? Freeman inquired. He falsely said he could fly. For that you go to hell? She did not reply. The hall had become gloomily dark, so they left. From the garden, close by the beach where the raft was anchored, they watched the water turn all colours. Isabella had little to say about herself. She seemed to be quite often pensive. And Freeman, concerned with the complexities of the future, though his heart contained multitudes, found himself comparatively silent. When the night was complete, as the moon was rising, Isabella said she would be gone for a moment and stepped behind a shrub. When she came forth, Freeman had this utterly amazing vision of her naked, but before he could even focus his eyes on her flower-like behind. Flower-like behind. She was already in the water, swimming for the raft. After an anguished consideration of could he swim that far or would he drown, Freeman, eager to see her from up close, she was sitting on the raft, showing her breasts to the moon, shed his clothes behind the shrub where her delicate things lay, and walked down the stone steps into the warm water. He swam awkwardly, hating the picture he must make in her eyes, Apollo Belvedere, slightly maimed, and still suffered visions of drowning in 12 feet of water. Or suppose she had to jump in to rescue him. However, nothing risked, nothing gained. So he splashed on and made the raft with breath to spare, his worries always greater than their cause. But when he had pulled himself up on the raft, to his dismay, Isabella was no longer there. He caught a glimpse of her on the shore, darting behind the shrub, nursing gloomy thoughts. Freeman rested a while. Then, when he had sneezed twice and presupposed a nasty cold, jumped into the water and splashed his way back to the island. Isabella, already clothed, was waiting with a towel. She threw it to Freeman as he came up the steps and withdrew while he dried himself and dressed. When he came forth in his seersucker, she offered salami, prosciutto, cheese, bread, and red wine from a large platter delivered from the kitchen. Freeman, for a while angered at the runaround on the raft, relaxed with the wine and feeling of freshness after a bath. The mosquitoes behaved long enough for him to say he loved her. Isabella kissed him tenderly. Then Ernesto and Giacobbe appeared and rowed him back to Stresa. Monday morning, Freeman didn't know what to do with himself. He awoke with restless memories, enormously potent, many satisfying, some burdensome. They ate him, he ate them. He felt he should somehow have made every minute with her better, hadn't begun to say half of what he had wanted, the kind of man he was, what they could get out of life together. And he regretted that he hadn't gotten quickly to the raft, still excited by what might have happened if he had reached it before she had left. But a memory was only a memory. You could forget, not change it. On the other hand, he was pleased, surprised by what he had accomplished. The evening alone with her, the trusting, intimate sight of her beautiful body, her kiss, the unspoken promise of love. His desire for her was so splendid it hurt. He wandered through the afternoon, dreaming of her, staring often at the glittering islands in the opaque lake. By nightfall he was exhausted and went to sleep, oppressed by all he had lived through. It was strange, he thought, as he lay in bed, waiting to sleep, that of all his buzzing worries, he was worried most about one. If Isabella loved him, as he now felt she did, or would before very long, with the strength of this love, they could conquer their problems as they arose. He anticipated a good handful, stirred up in all probability by her family, but life in the USA was considered by many Italians, including aristocrats, else why had Ernesto been sent to sniff out conditions there, a fine thing for their marriageable daughters. Given this additional advantage, things would somehow get worked out, especially if Isabella, an independent girl, gazed a little eagerly at the star-spangled shore. Her family would give before flight in her eyes. No. The worry that troubled her most was the lie he had told her, that he wasn't a Jew. Yes, it's not wise to begin any kind of connection, relationship or friendship with a lie. Dumb, and dumber. When a woman finds out she's been lied to from the very beginning, even if it's only a teeny tiny insignificant thing, it destroys any hope of any modicum of trust she may ever feel for you, ever. Especially people like me, who are trauma survivors. By the gods. I hate being lied to. There's no need for it. The girl asked him if he was Jewish, but she is. All he had to say was yes, and why would you ask such a question of someone you just met? Then she probably would have said, I'm Jewish too, and everything would have been handy-dandy and roses and hummus for the rest of their lives together. But he had to lie. Dumb girl. Storm's almost here. I'll have to shut all the windows. Or he might admit nothing and let her, more or less, find out after she'd lived a while in the States and seen it was no crime to be Jewish, that a man's past was, it could safely be said, expendable. Yet this treatment, if the surprise was upsetting, might cause recriminations later on. Another solution might be one he had thought of often, to change his name. He had considered Le Vin, but preferred Freeman, and forget he had ever been born Jewish. There was no question of hurting family or being embarrassed by them. He, the only son of both parents, dead. Cousins lived in Toledo, Ohio, where they would always live and never bother. And when he brought Isabella to America, they could skip NYC and go to live in a place like San Francisco, where nobody knew him and nobody would know. To arrange such details and prepare other minor changes was why he figured on a trip or two home before they were married. He was prepared for that. As for the wedding itself, since he would have to marry her here to get her out of Italy, it would probably have to be in a church, but he would go along with that to hasten things. 'Twas done every day. Thus he decided, although it did not entirely satisfy him, not so much the denial of being Jewish, what had it brought him but headaches, inferiorities, unhappy memories, as to the lie to the beloved. At first sight, love and a lie, it lay on his heart like a sore. Yet, if that was the way it had to be, it was the way. He awoke the next morning, beset by a swarm of doubts concerning his plans and possibilities. When would he see Isabella again, let alone marry her? When? He had whispered before getting into the boat, and she had vaguely promised. Soon. Soon was brutally endless. The mail brought nothing, and Freeman grew dismayed. Had he asked himself, been constructing a hopeless fantasy, wish-seducing probability? Was he inventing a situation that didn't exist, namely, her feeling for him, the possibility of a future with her? He was desperately casting about for something to keep his mood from turning dark blue when a knock sounded on his door. The padrona, he thought, because she often came up for one unimportant thing or another, but to his unspeakable joy, it was Cupid in short pants, Giacobbe holding forth the familiar envelope. She would meet him. Isabella wrote at 2 o'clock in the piazza, where the electric tram took off for Mount Motorone, from whose summit one saw the beautiful panorama of lakes and mountains in the region. Would he share this with her? Although he had quashed the morning's anxiety, Freeman was there at 1 p.m, smoking impatiently. His sun rose as she appeared, but as she came towards him, he noticed she was not quite looking at him. In the distance, he could see Giacobbe rowing away, her face neutral, inexpressive. He was at first concerned, but she had, after all, written the letter to him, so he wondered what hot nails she had had to walk on to get off the island. He must sometime during the day drop the word elope to see if she savoured it. But whatever was bothering her, Isabella immediately shook off. She smiled as she greeted him. He hoped for her lips, but got instead her polite fingers. These he kissed in broad daylight. Let the spies tell Papa. And she shyly withdrew her hand. She was wearing, it surprised him, though he gave her credit for resisting foolish pressures, exactly the same blouse and skirt she had worn on Sunday. They boarded the tram with a dozen tourists and sat alone on the open seat in front. As a reward for managing this, she permitted Freeman to hold her hand. He sighed. The tram, drawn by an old electric locomotive, moved slowly through the town and more slowly up the slope of the mountain. They rode for close to 2 hours, watching the lake fall as the mountains rose. Isabella, apart from pointing to something now and then, was again silent, withdrawn, but Freeman, allowing her her own rate at flowering for a moment without plans, was practically contented. A long vote for an endless journey, but the tram at last came to a stop and they walked through a field thick with wildflowers, up the slope to the summit of the mountain. Though the tourists followed in a crowd, the mountain top was broad, and they stood near its edge, to all intents and purposes, alone. Below them, on the green, undulating plains of Piedmont and Lombardy, 7 lakes were scattered, each a mirror reflecting whose fate? And high in the distance rose a ring of astonishing, snow-clad Alps. Ah, he murmured, and fell silent. We say here, Isabella said, un pezzo di paradiso caduto dal cielo. You can say it again. Freeman was deeply moved by the sublimity of the distant Alps. She named the white peaks from Mount Rosa to the Jungfrau. Gazing at them, he felt he had grown a head taller and was inspired to accomplish a feat men would wonder at. Isabella, Freeman turned to ask her to marry him, but she was standing apart from him, her face pale. Pointing to the snowy mountains, her hand moving in a gentle arc, she asked, "Don't those peaks, those 7, look like a menorah?" I told you, didn't I? I told you. Like a what? Freeman politely inquired. He had a sudden frightening remembrance of her seeing him naked as he came out of the lake, and felt constrained to tell her that circumcision was de rigueur in stateside hospitals. But he didn't dare. She may not have noticed. Like a 7-branched candelabrum holding white candles to the sky, Isabella asked. Something like that. Or do you see the Virgin's crown adorned with jewels? Maybe the crown, he faltered. It all depends how you look at it. They left the mountain and went down to the water. The tram ride was faster going down. At the lakefront, as they were waiting for Giacobbe to come with the rowboat, Isabella, her eyes troubled, told Freeman she had a confession to make. He, still eager to propose, hoped she would finally say she loved him. Instead she said, "My name is not Del Dongo. It is Isabella della Città. The Del Dongos have not been on the island in years. We are the caretakers of the palace, my father, brother, and I. We are poor people." Caretakers? Freeman was astonished. Yes. Ernesto is your father? His voice rose. She nodded. Was it his idea for you to say you were somebody else? No, mine. He did what I asked him to. He has wanted me to go to America, but under the right circumstances. So you had to pretend, he said bitterly. He was more greatly disturbed than he could account for, as if he had been expecting just this to happen. She blushed and turned away. I was not sure of the circumstances. I wanted you to stay until I knew you better. Why didn't you say so? Perhaps I wasn't serious in the beginning. I said what I thought you wanted to hear. At the same time, I wished you to stay. I thought you would be clearer to me after a while. Clearer? How? I don't really know. Her eyes searched his. Then she dropped her glance. I'm not hiding anything, he said. He wanted to say more, but warned himself not to. That's what I was afraid of. Giacobbe had come from the boat and steadied it for his sister. They were alike as the proverbial peas. Two dark Italian faces, the Middle Ages looking out of their eyes. Isabella got into the boat and Giacobbe pushed off with one oar. She waved from afar. Freeman went back to his pensione in a turmoil, hurt where it hurts, in his dreams, thinking he should have noticed before how worn her blouse and skirt were, should have seen more than he had. 'Twas this that irked. He called himself a damn fool for making up fairy tales. Freeman in love with the Italian aristocracy. He thought of taking off for Venice or Florence, but his heart ached for love of her, and he could not forget that he had originally come in the simple hope of finding a girl worth marrying. If the desire had developed complications, the fault was mostly his own. After an hour in his room, burdened by an overpowering loneliness, Freeman felt he must have her. She mustn't get away from him. So what if the Countess had become a caretaker? She was a natural-born queen, whether by Del Dongo or any other name. So she had lied to him, but so had he to her. They were quits on that score, and his conscience was calm. He felt things would be easier all around now that the air had been cleared. On that note, I'm just going to dash out and put my drying shed snakeskin back in the laundry because we've got a storm coming soon. Don't want it to get wet and manky and smelly again. My little love. Sweet little baby. I have to put the aircon on, I think. Dear Grace. Where's the, where is it? There it is. Did you do another cookie piece? My goodness. That's just a bit rude, isn't it? Right, here we go. Whew. Right, here we are. We're back again, people of Earth. Freeman ran down to the dock. The sun had set and the boatmen were home, swallowing spaghetti. He was considering untying one of the rowboats and paying tomorrow when he caught sight of someone sitting on a bench. Ernesto, in his hot winter hat, smoking a cheroot. He was resting his wrists on the handle of his cane, his chin on them. "You wish a boat?" the guide asked in a not unkindly tone. "With all my heart. Did Isabella send you?" "No." He came because she was unhappy, Freeman guessed, maybe crying. There's a father for you, a real magician despite his appearance. He waves a stick and up pops Freeman for his little girl. "Get in," said Ernesto. But like my ex-husband used to trawl all over Capalaba looking for my friend Jared because he knew I preferred his company to his. Isn't that fucking weird? Talk about setting you up, hoping that you would have a sordid affair, which we didn't. But he was hoping for it. Oh, it was all just too fucking weird. I can't abide psychopaths that try to set people up. It's nasty. But anyway, what can you do? Zero's a history, darlings. My Creek father had a small window of opportunity where he tried to manipulate Davidson when I was in love with him too. I said, "Why are you interfering yourself in my love life actually?" It's completely fucking inappropriate. So now I want nothing to do with either of you. And that's how it ended basically. Had to divorce both of them, my father and the former Israeli lover. Although we're disingenuous, both of them. Parasites, vermin. Anyway, hate being manipulated into relationships by anyone, man, woman or child. Only the gods know what is the best person who the best person will be for me. Why did you bite me so hard? Me, little birdie. Only the gods... You got me again. Only the gods and Charlie know who's the best person for me. What do you say, Charlie? She says, "Mama, don't do it, Mama. Enjoy your freedom for as long as you can, Mama." Amen, sister. No biting. You'll go back in your cage. She's thinking about it. I'll row, said Freeman. He had almost added, Father, but had caught himself. As if guessing the jest, Ernesto smiled, a little sadly, but he sat at the stern of the boat, enjoying the ride. In the middle of the lake, seeing the mountains surrounding it lit in the last glow of daylight, Freeman thought of the menorah in the Alps. Where had she got the word, he wondered, and decided anywhere, a book or picture. But wherever she had, he must settle the subject once and for all, tonight. When the boat touched the dock, the pale moon rose. Ernesto tied up and handed Freeman a flashlight. In the garden, he said tiredly, pointing with his cane. Don't wait up. Freeman hastened to the garden, up at the lake's edge, where the roots of... Yeah, well, that's just nasty, isn't it? You got me 3 times. Enough is enough. Basta, as they say in Italian. No bites. Freeman hastened to the garden at the lake's edge, where the roots of trees hung like hoary beards above the water. The flashlight didn't work, but the moon and his memory were enough. Isabella, God bless her, was standing at the low wall among the moonlit statuary. Stags, tigers and unicorns, poets and painters, shepherds with pipes and playful shepherdesses, gazing at the light shimmering on the water. Wonder if I should go dancing tonight. Burst Acoustica on tonight. If I dance tonight, I'll be too tired to dance tomorrow. But on the other hand, I'll have to think about it. She was wearing white, the figure of a future bride. Perhaps it was an altered wedding dress. She would not be surprised if a hand-me-down, the way they saved clothes in this poor country. He had pleasant thoughts of buying her some nifty outfits. She was motionless, her back towards him, though he could picture her bosom breathing. When he said good evening, lifting his light straw, she turned to him with a sweet smile. He tenderly kissed her lips. This she let him do, softly returning the same. Goodbye, Isabella whispered. To whom goodbye? Freeman affectionately mocked. I have come to marry you. She gazed at him with eyes moistly bright. Then came the soft, inevitable thunder. Are you a Jew? Why should I lie, he thought. She's mine for the asking. But then he trembled with the fear of, at the last moment, losing her. So Freeman answered, though his scalp prickled. How many no's make never? Why do you persist with such foolish questions? Because I hoped you were. Slowly she unbuttoned her bodice, arousing Freeman, though he was thoroughly confused as to her intent. When she revealed her breasts, he could have wept at their beauty, now recalling a former invitation to gaze at them, but he had arrived too late on the raft. To his horror, he discerned, tattooed on the soft and tender flesh, a bluish line of distorted numbers. Buchenwald, Isabella said. When I was a little girl, the fascists sent us there. The Nazis did it. Freeman groaned, incensed at the cruelty, stunned by the desecration. I can't marry you. We are Jews. My past is meaningful to me. I treasure what I suffered for. Jews, he muttered. You? Oh, God, why did you keep this from me too? I did not wish to tell you something you would not welcome. I thought at one time it was possible you were. I hoped, but was wrong. Isabella, he cried brokenly, listen, I am. He groped for her breasts to clutch, kiss, or suckle them. But she had stepped among the statues, and when he vainly sought her in the veiled mist that had risen from the lake, still calling her name, Freeman embraced only moonlit stone. The end. Let him marry a Shiksa, since he 3 times denied his heritage. Vermin he is. Vermin. A girl, a survivor of Buchenwald, deserves better. Mamati has spoken. And on that note, thus concludes today's readings of even dates. Arouse some ancient trauma memories and some ancient passions, but, well, I'm right though. She deserves better than a liar and a traitor of his people. It's a fine line, how much you slide away. Well, I don't have a congregation or a people anymore. Too many rapes and strangulations and humiliations and shawls and desecrations. But I'm okay with that. But if you start a romance off and a girl asks you if you're a Jew and you happen to be one, tell the truth, people of Earth. The truth will always, always set you free. My darlings. Enjoy the Brisbane storm, those of you in Brisbane and wherever else you are in the space-time continuum. Enjoy your authenticity, your culture, your nationhood, your race, creed or country or nationality or wherever it is. You stand upon this beautiful blue spiraling planet, Jew, non-Jew. It makes no difference in the broad scheme of things. But don't tell lies. Bye for now.